So, what connects a shipping container in Europe to a championship boxing match? It's a fascinating question, right? But instead of opening with violence, we're going to begin with evidence.
Every investigation begins with a question. Sometimes it begins with a body, sometimes with a bank transfer, and sometimes with a shipping container. Welcome to Echoes of Evidence. I am your host, and in today's explainer, we're going to follow the trail of the Kinahan investigation. This is the story of how investigators meticulously followed the evidence, because as we'll see, every crime leaves an echo.
Not Dublin, not Dubai, not even a cartel leader. We start with a shipping container. In ports all across Europe, customs officers began discovering shipments that just didn't belong. Hidden right there among legitimate cargo, investigators discovered cocaine worth hundreds of millions of euros.
Let's dive into part 1, Clues in the Cargo, the first threads. You know, across Europe, major ports process literally millions of containers every single year. We're talking places like Rotterdam, Antwerp, and Algeciras. Hidden inside all that legitimate cargo, investigators discovered large shipments of cocaine concealed within agricultural products and commercial freight. But here's the thing, each seizure represented way more than just a criminal shipment. It represented a crucial data point: shipping records, container tracking numbers, customs declarations. What initially appeared to be totally isolated drug seizures began revealing a highly coordinated operation. They weren't simply intercepting narcotics anymore. They were mapping an entire organization.
There is a saying in this line of work: one shipment rarely solves an investigation. Hundreds of shipments begin revealing a system, and every single shipment added another line to that map. They realized they weren't looking at some low-level street gang. They were uncovering something so much larger, an international criminal enterprise operating across multiple continents.
Which brings us to part 2, following the money trail, the financial footprint.
Large drug seizures definitely tell investigators what was moving, but financial records, they reveal who profits. To crack this, investigators were instructed to follow the money. Now, money rarely travels in a straight line, does it? It moves through layers. Shell companies disguise the initial ownership. Holding firms fund subsidiaries. Consulting firms are set up just to generate legitimate-looking invoices, while property investments hide the final assets. In fact, according to court records, money moved rapidly across borders, crossing jurisdictions faster than investigators could even request the records.
This realization required a massive shift in how authorities understand organized crime. The traditional view usually focuses on street gangs, physical territory, and violent enforcement. But the evidence revealed a modern reality. The Kinahan ecosystem was actually built on corporate shell companies, global supply chains, and international logistics. Financial analysts were no longer investigating isolated businesses. They were reconstructing an entire commercial ecosystem, one designed specifically to hide billions.
Moving on to part 3, the criminal corporation, a multinational syndicate.
By the mid-2010s, the big question was no longer if a network existed, but exactly how it was structured. The evidence suggested a highly sophisticated infrastructure. Investigators identified specialized roles functioning exactly like a multinational corporation. You had logistics managing the shipping routes, finance handling the money laundering, communications maintaining their encrypted networks, and legal support creating layers of corporate separation and redundancy. Each division operated completely independently, yet they all remained perfectly connected.
Sophisticated criminal enterprises, they don't depend on chaos. They depend on deep organization. But, as this analysis highlights, criminal organizations rarely collapse because someone talks. They collapse because financial systems remember. Think about it. Every payment leaves a timestamp. Every company leaves paperwork. The larger the organization gets, the more evidence it inevitably creates.
Let's look at part 4, Operation Shovel, Global Cooperation.
Every major investigation eventually reaches this tipping point, a moment when isolated clues become undeniable proof of coordination. Agencies across Ireland, the UK, the Netherlands, Spain, the US, and Europol began pooling their intelligence. But there was a catch. The organization had adapted to the digital age, heavily using encrypted burner phones. Traditional tactics just weren't going to be enough. So investigators deployed a modern toolkit. They used advanced financial intelligence tracking, deep digital forensics, and telephone metadata analysis. It was slow, patient work, but every search warrant added a vital piece to an increasingly detailed picture.
Now for part 5, the boxing connection, legitimate intersections.
As the inquiry expanded, a really startling question emerged.
How could an organization tied to global crime appear so close to legitimate, high-profile championship boxing? I mean, to millions of fans, it just looked like a standard sports business. But by strictly following documents, not assumptions, investigators meticulously examined the corporate structure surrounding these events. Now, legitimate businesses aren't inherently criminal. However, authorities allege that elements of the organization use these legitimate fronts to enhance their reputation and seamlessly facilitate wider operations.
Part 6. Global Sanctions. The Hammer Drops.
You see, modern organized crime rarely collapses from one dramatic made-for-TV raid. It collapses when thousands of independent facts become absolutely impossible to ignore. The path to public action unfolded over a long, deliberate timeline. Years prior, intelligence was quietly gathered across those European ports. By the mid-2010s, authorities had successfully mapped out the corporate structure. And then, years later, in April 2022, the U.S. Treasury announced massive sanctions and international rewards targeting senior members.
Unlike a dramatic arrest, sanctions work a bit differently. They completely freeze financial access worldwide. They restrict movement and travel. They sever those vital business relationships. They are designed not just to end an investigation, but to make the criminal activity literally impossible to sustain. It means total financial isolation, a passport that suddenly no longer opens any doors. The network is systematically stripped of the very tools it depends upon.
Which leads us to our final section, Part 7. The investigation continues, an evolving threat.
The legacy of this investigation extends far beyond a single cartel. It has fundamentally reshaped how international agencies monitor transnational crime today. Because the greatest lesson here wasn't really about drugs, it was about global systems. Criminal organizations spend years hiding themselves. Investigators spend years understanding them. Evidence does not forget. Time very often favors the patient. Because every single transaction, every single shipment leaves traces, and investigators know that those traces eventually become undeniable evidence.
Every crime leaves an echo. Sometimes those echoes remain completely silent for years, but eventually, investigators learn exactly how to hear them. Thank you so much for watching this explainer. We followed the evidence behind one of the world's most complex criminal networks. Before we go, I want to leave you with a question to think about. Which single piece of evidence do you believe changed this case the most? Let us know, because evidence remembers and truth prevails. I'll see you in the next investigation.